Imagine a man standing at the edge of a crowded bar. The music is loud, conversations overlap like waves, and yet he doesn't seem in a hurry. He's not scanning the room for approval. He's not laughing too loudly to get noticed. He's simply there, relaxed, as if the world outside and the world inside him move at the same steady pace. A woman glances at him once, then again. Something about his stillness feels magnetic. He's not chasing anyone, and yet people seem to drift toward him. That's the quiet paradox that modern men often miss. We've been told to go out, to pursue, to make a move before someone else does. We've been told that if we don't chase, we'll be left behind. But here's the truth, rooted in the centuries-old wisdom of Stoic philosophy. The more you chase, the more you teach people to run. The more you stand in your own grounded presence, the more the right ones find themselves drawn toward you. The Stoics never wrote about dating in our modern sense, but they understood human nature better than most so-called relationship experts today. They knew that attraction isn't about tactics, tricks, or lines. It's about who you are when no one is looking. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." That's the core of it. Before you think about pursuing someone, you have to decide who you are and stand firmly in that identity. Here's the problem most men face. They think attention from women will give them the identity they crave. They believe being wanted will make them feel valuable. But that's a dangerous illusion. If your sense of worth depends on someone else's response, you've already surrendered control. And when you give away that control, you become like a man lost at sea, at the mercy of currents you can't direct. What if the real power wasn't in chasing, but in becoming the kind of man worth chasing? Think about it. The men you've seen who seem to naturally draw women in, are they the ones frantically swiping through dating apps at 2 a.m.? Are they the ones crafting perfect texts and overthinking every emoji? No, they're the ones with lives so full of purpose, so rooted in self-mastery, that anyone who enters their orbit feels like they've stepped into a stronger, calmer world. That's what the Stoics mastered. Marcus Aurelius wasn't walking the streets of Rome thinking about how to impress anyone. He was too busy living his duty, writing his meditations, and ruling an empire with discipline and humility. And yet his presence, his restraint, his quiet strength would have been impossible to ignore. The reason this works is simple. Human beings are wired to notice what stands out. And in a world full of men chasing, the man who doesn't rush, who doesn't beg, who doesn't compromise his standards, he stands out like a lighthouse against a dark horizon. Now here's the question. How do you become that lighthouse? How do you stay rooted when the waves of desire try to pull you into chasing? It starts with shifting your focus from outcome to character. Chasing is always about an outcome. You want her attention, her approval, her affection. But when you live by Stoic principles, your focus is on who you're becoming, not what you're getting. And that shift changes everything. I once knew a guy, let's call him Daniel. Daniel had a string of relationships, each starting fast and ending faster. Every time the pattern was the same. He'd meet someone, feel the rush of attraction, and dive in head first. Calls, texts, gifts, he'd pour himself into the pursuit. And every time she'd pull away. By the third breakup, he was convinced there was something wrong with women. But the truth was, the problem was his energy. He was coming from a place of need, not from a place of abundance. The Stoic would look at Daniel and say, "You're seeking to control what isn't yours to control. You can't control someone's feelings, their interest, or their timing. You can only control your own actions, your own discipline, your own state of mind. Here's something to sit with. If she walked away tomorrow, would your world collapse, or would you still be standing?" That's the Stoic test. Not whether you can attract someone, but whether you can remain unshaken if they leave. This isn't about apathy, it's about independence. When your sense of peace isn't tied to someone else's behavior, you become unmovable. And that unmovable quality, it's rare, it's valuable, and yes, it's deeply attractive. Women, whether they realize it or not, are drawn to men who have this inner gravity. Men whose emotions aren't on a hair trigger. Men who can listen without rushing to fix, who can stand in silence without feeling awkward, who can walk away without resentment when something no longer aligns. The irony is that when you stop chasing, you create space for someone to come toward you. That space isn't empty, it's filled with your own life, your work, your passions, your friendships, your health. The more you invest in these, the more you naturally radiate the kind of presence that others want to be around. But there's a catch. Are you willing to let go of the chase long enough to find out what fills your own soul? Most men aren't. They're terrified of the silence. They're afraid that if they're not actively pursuing, they'll be forgotten. But here's the hard truth. If someone forgets you simply because you're not chasing them, they were never truly interested in you. They were interested in the validation you were giving them. I'll tell you a story about a man named Ryan. Ryan was a personal trainer, well-liked, always surrounded by people. But in private, he admitted to me that he hated being alone. Every quiet evening felt like a failure. So he kept his calendar full. Dates, drinks, parties, anything to avoid sitting with himself. The irony? None of these connections lasted. The moment he stopped pouring constant attention into a woman, she drifted. Not because Ryan wasn't a good man, but because he had taught them from day one that his role was to entertain and pursue. The Stoics would say Ryan was chasing not just women, but himself. He hadn't yet built the inner foundation that could hold him steady when the room was empty. And until you have that foundation, you'll always be chasing something or someone to fill the silence. So here's the challenge. Can you be alone without feeling lonely? Can you hold the frame of your own life so strongly that no one else's presence or absence can shake it? Because when you can, everything changes. You stop sending the energy of desperation. You stop treating attention like oxygen. And paradoxically, that's when people start leaning in. When you think about the men who inspire real respect, they're not the ones chasing every opportunity that glitters. They're the ones who can look at something beautiful, desirable, even tempting, and still say, "Not for me, not now." That kind of self-control is rare. In a culture built on instant gratification, it's almost alien. And that's exactly why it's so powerful. The Stoics understood that what you resist defines you as much as what you pursue. Seneca wrote, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." Chasing women without purpose is like drifting in a boat without a destination. Every passing breeze, a smile, a glance, a moment of flirtation becomes a reason to change direction. You waste time, energy, and self-respect in the process. But when you have your port, your mission, you stop letting every distraction steer you off course. Women can feel that difference instantly. The man who is centered has a certain stillness in his eyes. He's not scanning the room for possibilities. He's present in the moment, grounded in who he is. That presence is a magnet. It says, "I'm not here to be chosen. I'm here to live my life. You're welcome to join me, but I'll be fine either way." Ask yourself, when was the last time you spoke to someone without trying to impress them, without any agenda, just fully present? A man who can do that radiates authenticity, and authenticity is rare in a world of performance. The Stoic doesn't perform, he embodies. His life is the proof. He doesn't need to declare his values. You can see them in how he carries himself. You notice it in the way he listens, the way he walks away from drama, the way he chooses substance over spectacle. There was a guy I met once, Ethan. He wasn't rich, wasn't a social media star, didn't even own a flashy car. But when you spoke to him, you felt like you were the only person in the room. He wasn't in a rush to fill silences. He wasn't afraid to disagree. He could laugh at himself without losing dignity. And here's what amazed me. He never talked about dating, yet women seemed to find their way into his life effortlessly. The secret? He was so anchored in his purpose that people had to meet him where he stood. He wasn't moving his foundation to please anyone. In the modern dating world, the chase has become a game of speed. Who can text first? Who can escalate faster? Who can grab attention before it shifts somewhere else? But the Stoic man opts out of that race entirely. He plays a longer game, the game of building a life so rich, so disciplined, so authentic, that it naturally filters out those who aren't truly aligned. Here's the hard truth. If you stopped chasing today, how many of the people in your life would still show up? That's a question most men avoid because it can be uncomfortable. But it's the discomfort that shows you where you've been over-investing. Stoicism teaches you to welcome that discomfort, to use it as a signal for growth. If someone disappears when you stop chasing, they were never really yours. They were only responding to the energy you gave them. This is where many men struggle. They confuse activity with progress. They think as long as they're doing something, messaging, planning, showing up, they're moving forward. But in reality, they might just be running in circles. The Stoic flips the script. Before you move toward anyone, you ask yourself, is this in line with my principles? Does this serve my greater purpose? Or am I just trying to fill a gap in myself? Think about Marcus Aurelius writing in his tent between battles, reminding himself not to waste time on things that don't matter. The emperor of Rome still had to check himself, still had to resist the pull of ego and desire. If a man with the world at his feet could stop and question his impulses, what excuse do we have? And here's the paradox. When you stop acting from need, you start acting from strength. And strength attracts like nothing else, because attraction, at its core, isn't about tactics. It's about energy. Neediness repels, independence draws in. Chasing communicates lack. I don't have enough, so I need you to fill it. Standing still in your purpose communicates abundance. I already have enough, but I'm open to sharing it with the right person. When you live this way, you stop worrying about timing. You stop forcing connections. You realize that the right people don't require you to sacrifice your dignity, your schedule, or your values. They respect the boundaries that protect your peace. And those who don't, they simply fade away, leaving space for something better to enter. I once saw this play out in the most unexpected place, a small coffee shop in Denver. It was a cold morning and the place was packed. At a corner table sat a man reading a battered paperback copy of Meditations. He was wearing a simple gray sweater, no flashy watch, no phone in sight. He looked like he had nowhere to be, and yet every movement was purposeful. He took a sip of coffee, turned a page, paused to look out the window as if watching the snowfall was the most important thing in the world. Here's what struck me. In the 40 minutes I was there, 3 different women approached him. One asked about his book, another asked if she could share the table, and the last simply said, "You look so calm, it's nice to see someone not glued to their phone." He hadn't moved an inch to get their attention. He just existed fully in his moment. That's the power of not chasing. It leaves room for people to step into your space. Now imagine the opposite. A man scanning the room, looking for someone to notice him, adjusting his posture every time a woman walks by. That energy pushes people away, even if he doesn't say a word. Energy is felt before it's seen. That's why Stoics focus so much on mastering the inner world. If you're anxious, needy, or restless inside, people sense it, even if you're silent. But if you're calm, centered, and content, that too radiates outward. The outer chase always reveals the inner lack. So the question becomes, how do you fill that inner space so that you no longer need to chase? The answer is in living a life that excites you without anyone else's validation. The Stoics called it living according to nature, meaning living in harmony with your purpose, your values, and your reality. If your life is already rich with meaning, then a woman's presence becomes an addition, not a lifeline. This doesn't mean shutting people out or pretending not to care. It means caring deeply, but without attachment to outcomes. Epictetus said, "When you kiss your child, say to yourself, 'Tomorrow you may die.'" That sounds harsh, but it's a reminder that nothing is guaranteed. Love people fully, but understand they can leave at any moment. And if they do, you remain whole. Here's a challenge. Could you give someone your full attention without trying to lock them into your life? Could you let them walk away without chasing them down? Because when you can, you stop being a beggar for affection and start being a king of your own world. A king doesn't run down the street trying to get subjects to notice him. He sits on his throne, ruling wisely, and people come to him because his presence is worth seeking out. But there's a trap here. If you stop chasing just to get someone to chase you, you're still chasing. The motive matters. You can't fake stoic calm as a dating strategy. It has to be real. You have to genuinely value your own time, your own mission, more than the fleeting thrill of being noticed. Otherwise, the act crumbles under pressure. I've seen men try this, pretend to be distant, act busy, ignore calls to make a woman miss them. It sometimes works for a short while, but eventually the truth seeps through. True stoic detachment isn't coldness, it's warmth without need. It's the ability to offer your presence as a gift, not a bargaining chip. And here's where most men underestimate themselves. They think that if they're not constantly proving their worth to a woman, she'll forget them. But the reality is, people remember how you make them feel, not how hard you chase them. If your presence makes her feel calm, respected, and inspired, she'll seek it out again and again. Ask yourself, when you leave a room, what lingers behind you, desperation or dignity? Building that dignity requires discipline. You can't scroll through your phone all night, binge on cheap entertainment, and expect to radiate the energy of a man on a mission. You can't put your own dreams on hold for months just to make it work with someone who hasn't even committed to you. You have to keep walking your path, even if it means walking alone for a while. The Stoics knew that solitude isn't a curse, it's a forge. Alone time is where you sharpen your mind, strengthen your body, and clarify your values. If you can use solitude to build yourself, you become the kind of man who never truly feels alone, because his own mind is good company. And when you carry that into the world, people notice. Think about the last time you met someone who seemed completely at ease in their own skin. Didn't it make you curious about their life? Didn't you want to know what gave them that peace? That's the pull you create when you stop chasing. You make others curious enough to move toward you. So the real question is, are you willing to stop running long enough to let the world catch up to you? Because in the end, chasing women is just a symptom. The deeper problem is chasing validation, chasing distraction, chasing anything that will make you feel complete for a moment. But the Stoic knows there's no shortcut to that feeling. Completion comes from living in alignment with your highest self. When you have that, you don't need to chase, and the ones who see your value will come closer without you asking. There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes he's been running in the wrong direction. Maybe it's after yet another unanswered text. Maybe it's after she says, "I just don't feel the same way anymore." Or maybe it's just the quiet, hollow feeling after a night out, surrounded by people but somehow feeling unseen. That's when the truth starts to sink in. Not chasing isn't about playing hard to get. It's about no longer living as if someone else's attention is the finish line. The Stoics would have called this the turning point toward virtue. In their eyes, virtue wasn't a moral checklist. It was the deep alignment between what you believe, what you value, and how you act. If your actions are driven by fear of being alone, you're not acting from virtue, you're acting from insecurity. And insecurity always leaks through, no matter how confident you try to appear. When you're truly rooted in yourself, you stop bargaining with your dignity. You no longer rearrange your schedule to fit someone who treats you as an option. You no longer suppress your opinions just to keep the peace. You stop thinking of attention as something you have to win and start seeing it as something you either inspire naturally or not at all. Here's something to think about. How much of your energy today is spent trying to be noticed by someone else, and how much is spent building something worth noticing? I knew a man in Chicago. His name was Paul. In his 20s, Paul was a textbook chaser. He was charming, witty, quick with compliments. But it never lasted. Women enjoyed his attention, but the relationships fizzled. In his early 30s, after a breakup that hit him harder than he expected, he decided to stop dating altogether for a year. Instead, he poured himself into learning woodworking, running half marathons, and volunteering at a local youth center. Something interesting happened. Without intending to, he became magnetic. Friends started introducing him to women. Strangers struck up conversations. He wasn't chasing, but he was living so fully that people wanted to be part of it. The irony wasn't lost on him. When he stopped trying to get women, they started finding him. This is the heart of the Stoic secret. By mastering yourself, you become rare. And in a marketplace flooded with men willing to bend their entire life for a chance at romance, rarity is irresistible. But here's the challenge. Can you keep that rarity without turning it into arrogance? True Stoic confidence isn't about thinking you're better than anyone else. It's about knowing you don't have to compete for what's not meant for you. It's a quiet conviction that your life has value whether someone else validates it or not. And because you're not trying to impress, the moments you do share, your laughter, your stories, your time, feel genuine. The problem is modern culture rewards the opposite. Social media pushes you to perform constantly. Show your life, show your wins, prove you're worthy. Dating apps turn attraction into a numbers game, but the Stoic man opts out. He doesn't measure himself by likes or matches. His worth is internal, steady, immune to the highs and lows of public opinion. There's a saying attributed to Marcus Aurelius, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." That's the posture of a man who doesn't chase. He demands the most from himself, not from the world. And because he holds himself to high standards, he naturally commands respect without asking for it. Imagine walking into a room and not needing a single person's approval to feel good about yourself. What would you do differently? That's not a fantasy, it's a skill. And like any skill, it takes practice. The practice of setting boundaries, the practice of saying no without guilt, the practice of giving without expecting in return, and perhaps most importantly, the practice of letting go when something or someone isn't right for you. When you live this way, your presence becomes a filter. People who respect themselves will resonate with it. People who don't will feel uncomfortable and drift away. Either way, you win because your life remains aligned with your values. There's something I want you to carry with you after this video. Something beyond the surface level idea of don't chase women. It's the understanding that attraction is a side effect, not the mission. The men who inspire devotion, loyalty, and desire aren't the ones who learn the perfect pickup line or the most impressive text reply. They are the men who wake up every morning with a purpose larger than themselves. They are the men who would still live fully, even if no one was watching, even if there was no applause. Think about Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men to ever walk this earth. The emperor of Rome, with legions at his command, could have indulged in every pleasure imaginable. But instead, he sat alone with his journal at night, writing reminders to himself about humility, discipline, and compassion. He wasn't performing for anyone, he was calibrating his own soul. That is power, quiet, unshakable power. You may not be an emperor, but in your world, you have a kingdom. Your mind, your body, your daily choices. These are your dominion. And every time you neglect them in pursuit of someone else's validation, you abandon your post. You leave your throne empty. But when you tend to your kingdom, when you strengthen your body, sharpen your mind, nurture your friendships, build your skills, you sit back on that throne, not to look down on others, but to lead yourself. There's a subtle magic that happens when you start living this way. You stop giving off the energy of desperation. Your presence becomes calm but charged, like the ocean before a storm. You no longer ask, will they like me? But instead, do they align with my life? And here's the kicker. People feel safer, more curious, and more attracted to a man who doesn't need them. Not because he's cold, but because he's whole. The modern dating world thrives on speed, convenience, and superficial impressions. But a Stoic man is slow to give himself away. He's deliberate. He listens more than he speaks. He's comfortable with pauses in conversation. He's not trying to fill silence with noise. He's letting the silence work for him. And that's rare enough to be magnetic. In a room full of men shouting, the one who stands quietly with confidence will always draw the most eyes. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. You will have days when you slip, when you feel that urge to check your phone, to send that extra text, to push for attention that's not freely given. That's when you return to the Stoic practice. Pause, breathe, and remind yourself, is this within my control? You cannot control whether she calls you back. You cannot control how she feels about you, but you can control how you show up in your own life. You can control whether you keep building or start begging. One of the most liberating shifts you can make is this. Stop making women the measure of your worth. Start making your own discipline, your own growth, your own alignment with your values the measure. Women will come and go. People will praise and criticize you. But if your compass stays fixed, you will never be lost. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're sitting in a coffee shop, reading a book you actually enjoy. Not because you think it makes you look smart, but because you're hungry for knowledge. Your posture is relaxed. You're not scanning the room. You're not performing. Someone notices you. They might strike up a conversation. They might not. But either way, you haven't lost anything. You've gained. You've fed your mind. You've enjoyed your time, and you've lived your life without chasing. That's the paradox. When you stop making them the center, you become the kind of man people want to orbit around. And even if no one enters your orbit that day, you're still moving forward, still becoming stronger, wiser, freer. So where do you go from here? You start small. You practice saying no to things that don't serve you. You choose to invest an hour in the gym instead of in pointless texting. You learn something new, not because it will impress anyone, but because you want to be a man who knows. You stop explaining yourself to people who have already made up their minds about you. You keep your eyes on your own paper like Marcus Aurelius did centuries ago. And here's the beautiful truth. When you live like this long enough, women will notice. But by then, something profound will have shifted. You won't care nearly as much whether they do, because you'll be too busy living, too busy creating, too busy leading yourself toward the man you always knew you could be. So stop chasing, not as a tactic, not as a strategy, but as a declaration. I will no longer hand over my peace, my dignity, and my time in exchange for crumbs of attention. Walk your path, build your kingdom. Live in such a way that when someone steps into your life, they feel like they've entered a story worth staying in. And if they chase you, let it be because they see your strength, your peace, your purpose, and they know it's real. And if they don't, you remain whole. That's the Stoic secret. That's the real win.